It was a blessing. God blessed us. He said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, be a good steward of it. And what happened as a result of that is that we decided that we would reject God's goodness, reject God's standards, and accept our own. And that's really what the story of the fall explains, is mankind reaching out and taking hold of their own standards, rejecting God's protection, and choosing our own path. And as a result of that, we brought death and destruction and mayhem. And the story of the Scriptures, as Adam and Eve leave the garden, continues a downward spiral. Immediately, Cain and Abel, the first two sons of the first couple, find themselves in conflict, not because they're at odds with each other, but because Abel is doing what is acceptable to God, and Cain, for whatever reason, and we're not exactly told what the theological problem is there, but Cain and his sacrifice are not acceptable to God. And as a result, Cain kills Abel, and we have the consequences of the fall hitting home for Adam and Eve. Cain is sent away and is spared, and we see grace and mercy immediately within the text, right? Because God said, when you eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, you will die. But God doesn't kill them. God just has this separation between himself. There's a separation between Adam and Eve and the intimacy that they share. And they're sent out of the garden, and God doesn't kill them immediately. They begin to die, and there is destruction, and they don't get to partake of the tree of life, but they are still giving mercy. And we even see that in the fact that God clothes them. And then with Cain, his killing of his brother, God could have demanded his life from him. But in mercy, God allows him to live, and he separates himself and he closes himself off from the rest of the world. And there really begins to be two groups of people upon the earth. We have Cain and his descendants, and the Scriptures actually tell us that his descendants come up with a great number of things. His descendants create music. They create farming and the domesticating of animals. They create the first metallurgy and metal practices. There's a number of skills and benefits to the world that Cain and his descendants bring. But we have at the same time Cain's descendants bragging about how ruthless and how harsh they are towards their fellow man. Eventually, within just a few generations, according to what is recorded within the scriptures, we have the world so evil, so vile, that God says, I'm done. He regretted making man. So God looks down upon the earth and says, I will flood it, I will cleanse it, I will destroy my creation. But he finds Noah and he says, build me an ark. He gives him the descriptions of that ark. And within that ark, he preserves 2 of every kind of animal. Any animal that is clean, God commands him to keep 7 kinds, or 7 of those animals. Noah's family, his wife, who is unnamed, his 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and their wives, are preserved within the ark. It takes Noah approximately 120 years to complete the construction of the ark. We are told that Noah was a preacher, a proclaimer of righteousness. Noah was a proclaimer of righteousness. Now, we're not told what Noah proclaimed or what he preached. It is possible that Noah proclaimed righteousness simply by doing what God had told him to do, by his life. The unspoken example of a life well lived. But it's also very likely that Noah took time to speak to his neighbors, his friends, and those who came by, maybe even to ridicule him, to chastise him, to ask him what he's doing, to proclaim to them and to call them to repentance. So we have Noah as a preacher of righteousness, proclaiming to a lost and dying world. Now, here's what's interesting. If we take a moment and we look at the text, the ark is 300 cubits in length, it's 50 cubits in width, and is 30 cubits in height. Now, the first question we have to ask is, what's a cubit? What's a cubit? A cubit, put simply, is the distance between your finger and your elbow. This is a cubit. But something tells me that if I walked up to my wife and her cubit and my cubit, we're going to be different, right? So there's 2 standardized cubits that are known from antiquity. There is the long cubit and the short cubit. The long cubit is approximately 17.5 inches. Or that's the short cubit, I'm sorry. The short cubit is approximately 17.5 inches. A long cubit, a long royal cubit technically, I believe this comes from a cubit measure, an actual stick that was found from antiquity, is just over 20.5 inches long. So those are the different cubits. Now that we've determined what a cubit is, we can then take that math and figure out how long in feet the ark is. So we are looking at anywhere from 437 to 510 feet long, approximately 75 to 85 feet wide, and approximately 44 to 51 feet long, or tall. So those are the dimensions roundabout of the ark. Now, as a woodworker, as a hobby, traditional hand planes and all of that stuff, I can tell you that though it may take a little bit more time and effort, it is more than plausible that Noah had more than enough skill and know-how to create large timber frame building that would have supported this structure. And with Cain's descendants having metallurgy, it is not unreasonable to think that many of the images of traditional woodworking that we have today would have also existed in his day. The plane, the draw knife, the axe, all of those features, the chisel, the saw, those are very universal methods that different cultures throughout time and space have reproduced. Whether they've lost and regained that knowledge, or whether they've created that knowledge or passed that down, that knowledge is very old. And because many planes are wooden bodied, especially older planes are wooden bodied, the wood just breaks down. When the plane body wears out, you just put it in the fire to warm yourself and you get the next piece of lumber, and if the steel's still good or the brass is still good, you just reuse that and it just keeps on going until it's used up. So it's not surprising that some of these things historically from antiquity are not necessarily found. Now, why do I bring all that up? The ark, with a rough equivalent of volume, able to withhold of 450 semi-trailer loads full, would have been more than sufficient to not only house all the animal types, right? We don't need to have a golden retriever and a lab and a chihuahua and all these other animals. We just need a dog, right? We don't have to have all the different types of cats. We just need one cat, right? So when we break down the number of animals that would need to go into the ark to preserve the creation of kinds of animals, we have more than enough space within the ark for all of the animals that would need to be preserved through a flood upon the ark, and to have additional space for additional passengers. So with Noah being a preacher of righteousness, we have him proclaiming to his generation, saying, save yourselves, and they rejected it. They rejected it. Eventually, Noah and his family are told to go into the ark, and God closes the door. God seals them in, and they will be there for just over a year. We're told that the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, once again, Genesis is giving us history. It is telling us what happened, but it is not a history book. It is proclaiming to us truth, but it is not telling us everything we want to know. So we have to be careful about how we take the text and make it answer our own questions. Right? Now, there's a lot of people trying to figure out the scientific this and that of how all these things took place. And I'm not saying that's bad, nor am I saying that's wrong. I have watched a lot of those videos and a lot of those talks and a lot of that evidence that I looked at, and I agree with a great majority of it. But we need to understand that that's not the point of the text. The point of the text is not to tell us where all the water came from or how all these things took place, and to then create a scientific explanation as to how these things happened. The text says they happened. And the reason that they happened was because God did it. So even if we can't find a scientific explanation, which I think there is reasonable explanations as to how these things were taking place and what was literally happening, that's not the point of the text. Same thing goes for creation. God created it. God created it. But God created it. God did it. You can go beyond that and you can ask questions about that. You can have your own theories about that. That's fine. But God did it. And the same thing is true when we come to the text of Genesis and the flood. God created enough water in that moment to cover the whole world. Whether there was mountains upon that pre-flood earth or not, whether it was one continent or multiple continents, whether there was identical pockets of water beneath the surface at X amount of feet that God caused to be crushed and to spurt forth, or whether it was just the biggest tsunami rainstorm you've ever seen, or it was ice crystals from the great arc in the sky. However you want to view it, the point is God said it rained for 40 days and 40 nights and everything was covered. Now, we need to be careful that we do not equate this to a localized flood, though. Why? Because at the very end, God's going to say, I'm never flooding the earth again. We had a flood here a few months back, didn't we? And it didn't cover the earth, right? We had a flood that took place where I worked last, there in Loveland, and it went down this canyon, and it took out this huge pipe that was way up in the above the roadway, and it just completely flooded the town, destroyed homes, killed people. Did God break his word? No, right? We're talking about a globalized flood. Now, we can debate whether or not there's evidence for that or not. I would say there is. I think there is universal geography and geological formations of things like fossils and other sediments that would point to that. But the point of the scriptures is not to argue for the existence of dinosaurs or for how the world came into existence or where fossils came from. That's not the point of the text. And we have to be careful about how we equate these things. Okay? The point that God is making is that God found amongst Noah someone righteous from the descendancy of Seth, the brother of Cain and Abel. And through that line, God says, I found a righteous person. Here's how we're going to save creation through the water that I'm going to send to cleanse the world. And God did it. That's the big point. Now, after the 40 days of rain, wherever that water came from, whether it be coming up from the surface, but from subterranean water being shot up into the atmosphere, or whether it just be the craziest God-formed and made and forced rain that you've ever seen, the earth is covered, and all of the mountains, it says, are even covered. And it gives a sounding for where they think that distance is. Now, whether this is tradition passed down from Noah and his sons and some rope they had off the ark and a rock there at the bottom or not, or whether it's just God there on Mount Sinai telling this to Moses, this is what we're told happened. Right? And once again, the point of the text is to proclaim what happened, not to be scientific. And I know that's a weird dichotomy to hold, because we want it to just be factual. We want it to be one way, and that's just not what the text is making. It's making a theological point within a historical, true framework. It's highlighting important points. Once the water subsides, there's 150 days that the water will remain unchanged, or it would seem unchanged, upon the earth. All of the living creatures that move upon the ground, not within the ark, pass away during those days. So apparently somewhere there was some lizard or some person hanging on to a log somewhere that after that 150 days, God said, all right, everything's passed away that's not upon the ark. I now can begin to drain the world. And that water begins to subside. The water takes another approximately 150 days for that water to subside. And then the ark comes to rest in the mountains of Ararat, is what we're told. eventually the ark comes to rest enough that Noah sends out a number of birds to investigate what's going on. They didn't have drones, so they had to send out birds. Back when birds were real. And they go out and they try to find a place to land. They can't find a place to land. Eventually a dove goes out and finds a olive tree, brings back a piece of it. And the next time he sends out the dove, it stays. It does not come back. A few days later, they are then able to leave the ark, and they begin to repopulate the earth. And Noah then makes a sacrifice to God and worships God and praises God as a result of God bringing them safely through the water, preserving them, and blessing him and his family. Noah and his family are told to repopulate the earth and subdue it, just like Adam and Eve were told. And Noah takes up maybe his third hobby or third vocation of his life. We are not told what he did before he built the ark, but he became an ark maker. I guess he eventually became a zookeeper and captain of a ship, so maybe we're on his fourth or fifth, but he becomes a farmer. Or maybe he goes back to farming. And he chooses to plant a vineyard. He tends this vineyard, and he creates wine from this vineyard. And the cycle of humanity falling is once again proclaimed, once again seen. Even the righteous Noah gets drunk upon his own wine. His son goes in, his son Ham goes in and sees his father in his drunken state, and something happens that is disrespectful towards his father, is unrighteous. There's a number of different theories as to kind of what's going on, but as a result of this, the descendants of Ham are cursed. They're cursed. One of the next things that we're told is that out of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the descendants of the world come. And we're told kind of who the heads of these families are that come from these three gentlemen. And we get a general gist of the direction from which they go and how they repopulate the earth. I've included in your handout a map of where Japheth's descendancy kind of takes off towards. They go into Europe. We have Ham going into Arabia and into Africa. And we have Shem going into Arabia and somewhat towards Africa as well. So from these descendants, we have the population of the earth. Everybody comes out of these. And once again, we come back to the same theological point that we made all the way back in Genesis chapter 1. Out of one man and one woman, God created and had the descendancy of all of creation. If we don't hold to that, then we have a theological problem that we have to address of sin coming through one man and death through that man. And then we have the one man Christ, a descendant of Adam, bringing salvation to all of Adam's descendants. So if you're not a descendant of Adam, the question then becomes, are you then given that same salvation that Christ brought? In a similar way, we have the descendants of Noah through Ham, Shem, and Japheth creating all known civilization through the flood. So we have the preservation of the human race through these individuals, and all of us being a descendant of these. This also, I would say, completely destroys the idea of race And this idea that somehow there are greater and lesser humans. The Bible just completely blows that out of the water, because we all come from the same ancestry. We're all descended from Adam and Eve. And we're all run through the line of Noah and his 3 sons. Now, how far we're removed from each other, right? And we can see the diversity of the human race even in this room, but we're all humans. We're all made in the image of God. We're all bearers of his likeness. We are all placed as kings and queens over his created dominion, and given a mandate to rule and reign responsibly over what he's given to us. So the theological point is an important one to understand, and to not give any room for people to say, yeah, but these people are less human, or these. No, we're all human. We all come from Adam and Eve. We all come from the descendants of Noah and his 3 sons. That's where we all come from. We're all related. Let's stop killing our brothers. The question of what Cain says hours after he takes his brother's life. Am I my brother's keeper? God says, yes. Yes, you are. And your brother's blood cries out from the ground, and it demands a verdict. Demands a verdict. Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, the story of Noah and his descendants. That's really the things you can hang your hat on and you can know and are theologically important. So I'm going to put a pin in it right there, and I'm going to open it up to anybody who has questions or thoughts before I jump into some of the weeds, because there are a lot of weeds around this subject, for better or for worse. I'm not that good of an explainer. Somebody's got to have questions. Right, the descendants of Cain. So this leads into one of the next points of weeds to get into. So the descendants of Cain are given in Genesis, I believe it's chapter 5. Right after the fall, right after Cain kills his brother, we have the descendancy of Cain. We're not told of the descendancy of Cain after the fall, after the flood. They're wiped out because all the descendancy comes out of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right? All of the world is destroyed. Everything is washed clean through the flood. Now, this gets into the first little side note of the Nephilim. And we've had some discussions about some of the weeds on this point as well. So the sons of God discover that the daughters of men are beautiful. We know that, right, gentlemen? Daughters of men are gorgeous, right? We know that. Okay. And they begin to take wives from whichever ones they wish. And out of these descendants of these marriages, we have the men of renown. We have great individuals, giants. And that's all we're told. That is literally all the text tells us. Text tells us nothing else. Now, in the Bible Project video, as we kind of did the overview a couple weeks ago, they highlight this point of questioning and the current debate that kind of goes around. Are these evil angels, the sons of God, are these evil angels that are in rebellion against God, who see mankind and say, ooh la la, and then do something that they should not be doing, something that they were not designed to do? Or and this is the view that I have, are we continuing to talk about the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth, and these two bloodlines that are followed through the pages of Scripture? Our eyes always go cross when we get to the genealogies. The point of the genealogies is to tell us where these family lines are coming from and going. That's the point of them. I know our eyes go cross. I know it's a little bit complicated and convoluted, but the point of all of this is to explain where these two lines are going and coming from. So we have the descendants of Seth, the sons of God, intermarrying with the women of the world, the daughters of Cain, and having children by them through these marriages. And out of them come these leaders of the pre-flood world. Out of them come these men, these leaders of renown, giants in their day. So which is it? Is it angelic beings having ungodly offspring who are secretly polluting the world and polluting the bloodline of man? Or is it the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth intermarrying and creating offspring? I would say the biblical text that we have in our Bibles here would point towards this continuing to be a discussion between Cain's descendants and Seth's descendants. Now, of course, the descendants of those men who we have in Noah and Ham, Shem, and Japheth and their wives probably had some of the bloodline of Cain in it. I don't think that God was saying that the descendants of Cain were somehow so corrupt that God looked upon the earth and found only people who were descended of Seth's line and only those people were saved. I don't think that's the argument being made. I think the point being made is that we have the righteous Noah who is continuing to follow God, and we have the world that has gone awry following the way of Cain, being corrupted by the way of Cain, even those who are descended of Seth. Now, here's what I think isn't understood about those who might claim that the Nephilim are somehow descendants of half-angelic beings. All of the information that we have about this other theory that these are angelic beings that are being discussed comes out of the book of Enoch. And it will often be discussed as, oh, well, that's out of the book of Enoch. Now, of course, Enoch is the father of Methuselah, who is the longest living person on earth. A pre-flood individual who we're told walked with God, was righteous, and then was no more. And everyone goes, huh? And that's all we're told about him. He walked with God and he was no more. Okay. But then the book of Enoch comes up. Now there's a lot of things we don't understand about the book of Enoch, because it's not the book of Enoch, it's the books, plural, of Enoch. First you have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Enoch. So which book of Enoch are we talking about? Most people are referring to book 1. What part of book 1? Because book 1, Enoch 1, is actually a compilation of 5 books that have been compiled. So the book of Enoch that refers to the Nephilim are actually out of the book of the Watchers. How many have I lost? Right?
But the book of Enoch was not written by Enoch.
Correct. And
The thing that other people don't understand, that Enoch himself didn't write this book. This book was written about 2,000 years after all this
right.
happened.
And that is one of the most important things to keep in mind. When we say the book of Enoch, we're not talking about a book or a scroll found that was written by Enoch, though that's what it claims. Everyone knows and everyone accepts that the book of Enoch was written 4 centuries before Jesus, in the 4th century BCE. That's the earliest that it would have been written, and it was compiled into the first book of Enoch. These 5 writings, these 5 books were compiled probably around the 1st century. Our oldest copy of the book of First Enoch was discovered amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it was in the QAnon, I'm getting those names mixed up, but the Qumran scrolls, right? And that community, right? So we're talking about a book that's ascribing itself to have been written by somebody from great antiquity, but was actually written much, much later by an unknown person or persons, that was then compiled and kept, and it is really very Gnostic. All 3 of these books are very Gnostic in their writings. One of the people that I listened to that kind of was doing an overview of these books that I found very informative and I think was very accurate was talking about how this is kind of fanfic. Right? We've all, we get into our different genre of films or books, right? Whether it be The Lord of the Rings, or it's some superhero person or group, or maybe you're into some writing from some author of... Right, the... Mm-hmm. Right.
This is how Achilles wasn't dipped into the river Styx, making him the first true Superman.
Right.
Nothing could hurt him except for his skill.
Right.
These are books of that nature.
These are books of that nature, and it really is fanfic, right? It's just somebody who took a individual and said, "This is really cool. I'm going to claim this guy's name and what happened to this gentleman." Right? And it just takes this single line from the text and it explodes it into this huge body of literature. Right? And it just gets more and more extreme as you go from First Enoch to Second Enoch, and from Second Enoch, Third Enoch is just way out there. Cliff notes on Third Enoch is that, in fact, according to Third Enoch, Enoch becomes the archangel, basically, Metatron. And if that sounds ridiculous, it's just that ridiculous, right? The idea that a man would be elevated to the position of deity, second only to God, both in power and in station and in essence, is just crazy. But Jesus was not a created being. He was in the beginning. He pre-exists. He has always existed. He is eternal. Right? He was not a man who was then elevated to Christ, elevated to be God, but he has always existed. Right? So that's one of the key differences, and that's one of the reasons why something like Third Enoch very clearly, because it was very much written in the 3rd or 4th century AD, not BC, AD, is very much Gnostic in its thinking and in its tone and all of those sorts of things. So when we're looking at the books of Enoch, we're looking at books that are rejected from the scriptures, not because there's some conspiracy, but because these were just known to not be reliable works. They're not proclaiming truth. They're peddling ideas and concepts that, while the early church was aware of them, Enoch is quoted by Jude, right? And Jewish writers and individuals at the time were aware of the book of Enoch and some of the concepts of that are coming out of these, but that doesn't make them scripture, nor does that make them authoritative or in any way the truth. And one of the challenges that we have with the book of Enoch is there's a lot of angelology that comes out of the book of Enoch, explaining the orders of angels and additional archangels and names given. And all this information comes out of these kind of works of literature that are very much suspect in their authorship and in their authenticity. Okay, now that I've lost half of you, and maybe made a few of you frustrated, questions and comments? Frustrated. Starts with G-N. After that, I don't know. Gnostic, yes. Gnostic is right. Yeah. Gnostic is secret knowledge. And it ultimately does come down to the fact that Jesus is not enough. It's not enough to just have Jesus. We have to have types that precede Jesus. We have to have secret knowledge that saves us and gives us a better position within Christendom. Right? Other questions, comments? That was a very long explanation to your question, but it was all seeking to answer the question you raised, and it was all in my notes anyway. So. That he would be subservient to his brothers, mainly. And one of the points that the biblical author, Moses in this case, is making, God through Moses is making, is that Ham, in his descendants, was Canaan. And a big reason that that Ham and his descendants were thrown out of the land of Canaan is due to their sin. And we see that very clearly throughout the pages of Scripture, because when the promised land is given to Abraham and to his descendants, God says the sins of the land has not reached its full measure. So God's looking out over Canaan and says, I'm going to give you this land, but I'm not yet ready to give final judgment upon these people yet, because their sin has not reached that level yet. I'm going to let you grow into a people group. They're going to go off into captivity in Egypt before being brought back, when the sin of the land of Canaan will have reached its full measure. And God says, I'm now pronouncing judgment upon you. Right? So the curse of Ham relates to the judgment of the land of Canaan that will come later. So that's part of what's going on thematically through the Pentateuch, right? The first 5 books of the Bible that Moses wrote. I don't know that we can say biblically that Cain's offspring were cursed. Cain was cursed because of his sin. Cain's offspring are affected by the culture of Cain, both his walling off and his anger that led to the killing of his brother. We see that in Cain's descendant, this king that sits upon a throne and says, look at the people that I have killed. You look at me wrong, I will kill you. I've collected women like prizes. I am 1,000 times worse than Cain, and I'm proud of it. Right? That came out of a mentality of Cain and his offspring. It is not a result of God cursing his offspring. And the same is true of Ham and any number of the other descendants that we're going to have. We have the same kind of blessing and cursing going on as we go through the text of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And we have Judah being chief amongst the brothers, but he's the third born. Right, the first 2 brothers, because of their sins, their descendants are given less position, but ultimately God is judging each individual off of their actions. And that's an important note to follow throughout the whole of Scripture, is that always everyone is dealt with based upon their sin, but often other people's sins affect us. Right? So for instance, your sin of drunk driving, for instance, or your sin of anger and then murder may affect the person killed by your actions, and the family affected by the loss of that individual. But every individual is going to be dealt with based upon their own actions. God gets really angry in the prophets with Israel when he says, you say this proverb that the parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Right? It's not that it's not true that bad actions from parents will affect the life that their kids have, but that's correlation and causation, not because God is then punishing the children for the sins of the parents. Does that make sense?
Why does he say cursed be Canaan? Why didn't he say cursed be Ham in that case? And it says, the lowest of slaves will be to his brothers. So it makes it sound like it's the people of Canaan will be subservient. Not Ham will be subservient to his brothers, but the
Right.
people of his territory.
Right.
Will be subservient to the people, the Jephthhites, or
You know, all the ites.
and so it makes it sound like it was not just exclusive to him, but
Right.
his people.
So think about this in its reverse, how it appears in Scripture. We have Abraham, or Abram, being blessed, and that blessing following his descendants, right? Based upon their actions, to some extent, right? We have Esau, I hated, and Jacob I love, not because God hated Esau and he was just doomed from the beginning, but because God is reacting and knows what's going to happen through these individuals, right? And their actions giving result. So in the same way that Ishmael is overlooked and the blessing goes to Jacob, and then the blessing goes to Jacob, and then and Isaac, right, and down to Judah and to David and to Christ, so too the curse is kind of following down to say, okay, and it really manifested itself in the descendancy of Canaan. Right? We're not told all the answers as to why it got there. Right? But that seems to be the point the text is making. Right? And ultimately, that's what we're limited to, because history only gives us so much information. Archaeology only gives us so much information. We can seek to put the puzzle piece together to some extent, but ultimately the text is making a theological point. And the theological point that Moses and then Joshua is getting to is that Canaan is under judgment in part due to the things that took place before. Right? And we see that really throughout the pages of Scripture.
We get the same, like father, like son,
Yes.
from this idea. And it's not that because the son is like the father, other than through habits and custom way of living and his thinking. And, for many years, we've seen it that it's not always the case, but usually parents who smoke, children smoke. It followed this.
Right.
Not only that, there's other things that we do have a tendency of having that habit follow. We ourselves are within us, Cain exists as well. A metaphoric Cain as well, because we do sometimes, I too have found
Yeah, well, and we often have the situation where you either follow in the footsteps of your parents or you go the exact opposite direction, right? Dad was a drunk and I'm a drunk. Or dad's a drunk and I won't drink a drop, right? And it kind of goes to those extremes. All right, we are out of time. Based upon the handout, I want to touch base on just a couple things. One, there's been some work done, and once again, this is not the point of the text. This is something that we do, right? Coming up with a date of when the flood took place based upon known dates like the Exodus and other historical individuals. We can go back through the generations and the genealogies given to come up with a date range. If we are to take a Exodus from Ramesses II's dynasty, we come up with a range from around 2107 to 2137 BC. That's a later date. An earlier date would be based upon the genealogy of the kings and when Solomon's reign was, and doing genealogy work on that, and 450 years in the Exodus and all these things. We get a date of around 2348 to 2393 BC. Of course, there's other theories and ideas based upon geography and other things, having it weighed in the distant past or more recent. There's a number of historical attempts to locate the ark in time and space. Often Ararat, Mount Ararat is the place that everyone looks. Nothing of significance has been found to my knowledge upon either lesser or greater Mount Ararat. It's a twin peak situation. They're in Turkey, eastern Turkey. Yeah, so that's kind of where these mountains are located. We believe that to be the geographical location. There is a valley just to the west of Ararat, known as the Valley of the Eight, and there are these large anchor stones that have been found there, all of which are graffitied by those who went through with the, trying to keep my words correct here, oh, it's on this other page, that's why it's not. They went on war to free the Holy Land. The Crusades, yeah, the Crusaders went through this region, found them, thought they were from the Ark as well, and they carved 8 crosses on them. Obviously, those 8 crosses aren't from Noah. To the south, there is a formation that was recently discovered that seems to not be naturally occurring. That is the approximately size and dimensions of the Ark. So some interesting archaeology has been found to kind of point towards that being the final resting of the Ark. But once again, that's not found in Genesis 1 or anywhere else. It's us kind of looking around going, where's this thing found, right? What's going on with this? So just interesting things to look at. Just some 1,000-foot view of kind of the discussions that are going on around this topic if you want to look more into it. We are out of time. So if you have questions, come up, ask me. Love to talk about it. Great topic to discuss and think about. But I will bid you adieu, and we'll get ready for worship. Thank you all.